You sit down at a table with a friend. You order the exact same meal. An hour later, they feel perfectly fine, while you are uncomfortably bloated, feeling like your stomach is pressing against your ribs. It gets stranger. A plate of raw vegetables, fiber-rich lentils, and fermented foods will often trigger a massive balloon-like response. But a meal consisting entirely of ultra-processed junk food passes right through without a single twinge of distress. If food were the primary cause of bloating, everyone at that table would react the same way. The breakdown happens in the machinery doing the work, the digestive system's capacity to process what it receives. Junk food requires almost zero biological effort to process. Industrial manufacturing has already done the heavy lifting, stripping the fiber, breaking down the fats, and essentially pre-digesting the ingredients before they ever hit your plate. On the other hand, whole foods arrive structurally intact. To break down a fibrous vegetable or a complex animal protein, your digestive tract requires a highly coordinated, perfectly functioning assembly line. Bloating after a healthy meal serves as an urgent warning alarm. Your internal assembly line has lost the capacity to process the very foods your body was designed to eat. That breakdown almost always starts at the top. The stomach is the first major processing checkpoint, and as we age, it frequently stops producing enough acid, a condition called hypochlorhydria. You might assume you have too much stomach acid because the primary symptom of this condition is acid reflux, but that is a mechanical illusion. Heartburn is almost always the result of too little acid in the stomach. This animated cross-section of the stomach and esophagus shows why. The valve separating them relies on a highly concentrated acid signal, comparable to battery acid, to snap shut. Without that strong acid, the valve remains partially open, allowing whatever weak fluid is present to splash upward. With the acid too weak to perform its primary function, we see the first downstream failure. Because the stomach cannot dismantle complex proteins, large, completely intact fragments pass right out of the chamber, untouched. The breakdown continues here. Weak stomach acid fails its secondary job as a chemical sterilizer. Ingested bacteria and pathogens that should have been eradicated easily survive the fluid bath and exit alongside those undigested proteins. The standard medical response to reflux is an antacid or a proton pump inhibitor. This suppresses the acid even further, taking a struggling system and completely shutting it down. This stomach failure triggers a massive downstream consequence, launching a contaminated, completely undigested payload directly into the lower intestines. Just below the stomach sits the second failure point, the gallbladder. Its job is to inject bile into the digestive tract to break down incoming dietary fats. Look at this macro shot of a thick, viscous fluid struggling to move through a narrow channel. This is bile sludge. Instead of flowing freely when food arrives, the congested bile slows to a crawl. When bile turns to sludge, two things happen. Fats pass through unemulsified, meaning you lose the ability to extract fat-soluble nutrients. And the gut loses its secondary chemical defense, because healthy bile naturally keeps lower intestinal bacteria in check. There is a highly specific physical tell for this dysfunction. Backed up bile creates pressure in the bile ducts. That pressure frequently refers pain entirely away from the abdomen, showing up as an unexplained ache in the right shoulder or the upper right back. Without ascetic sterilization from above and without freely flowing bile from the side, the gut's chemical defense grid is effectively offline. This dual failure creates a highly specific problem in the lower gut. The stomach didn't kill the incoming microbes, and the gallbladder didn't supply the antimicrobial bile to suppress them. This opens the door for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. Bacteria that belong safely down in the large intestine migrate upward and establish permanent colonies where they don't belong. The small intestine is roughly 25 feet of narrow tubing designed exclusively to absorb nutrients. It has absolutely no capacity and no structural design to comfortably expand or hold gas. This map of the small intestine illustrates the true source of the pain. When you eat healthy, fibrous foods, these misplaced bacterial colonies gorge on those intact fibers. They ferment the food in real time, releasing a massive, diffuse cloud of gas directly into a narrow tube that cannot handle the pressure. This is why common advice actively backfires. If you add more fiber to your diet or take a standard probiotic, you are simply dropping more food and more bacteria into a system that is already choked with an overpopulation of microbes. SIBO is the hidden mechanism at play. It takes a structurally intact, nutrient-dense diet and turns it into an agonizing fermentation trap. Effective treatment follows the physical direction of digestion. Attempting to fix the intestines is a losing battle unless you first repair the upstream stomach acid and bile flow that allowed the overgrowth to establish itself. The protocol starts of the stomach. Taking a supplement called betaine hydrochloride immediately before meals artificially restores that highly acidic environment, breaking down proteins and snapping the esophageal valve shut while the body recovers. Next, you address the gallbladder. Introducing purified ox bile or TUDCA supplements physically thins out the bile sludge, getting the fluid moving again so it can emulsify fats and suppress bacterial overgrowth. Notice this rhythmic sweeping motion actively clearing debris from the surface. This represents the migrating motor complex. To treat SIBO, you temporarily eliminate fermentable fiber to starve the bacteria, practice intermittent fasting to activate this physical sweeping mechanism, and introduce a highly specific probiotic strain called L. reuteri to actively displace the overgrown colonies, which brings us back to the original dining table. The fact that ultra-processed junk food can bypass this broken, congested system without triggering a bloating response is not a victory. Because it requires zero digestion, junk food passes silently into the bloodstream. It causes systemic, inflammatory damage to the liver and arterial walls,